Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we now are in the second meeting number 7. If you remember last week, we discussed about the goal, content, and sequencing. And today we come to the next step in the curriculum development process, that is the format and presentation. So once we formulate the goal and decide the content and the sequencing of the content, then we have to discuss about the format and presentation. The aim of this session is that you will be able to choose the teaching and learning techniques and design the lesson plan. So once we know the content and the sequencing, then we have to prepare how to present and in this format this content is going to be presented, how we are going to deliver this content. Then that's the problem of selecting the appropriate techniques of delivery of the content. So the aim of the session is you'll be able to do that, to choose the teaching and learning techniques appropriate to the goal and the content of the course. Now let's see some guideline for decision in terms of the environment. You remember that when we do the environment analysis, we are dealing with the learners, the situation, and the teachers. Now, when we try to decide the format and presentation of the content, then we go back to those aspects of environment. So first of all, about learners. One of the most important considerations about the format and technique for delivery is that the layout or content should attract the learners. That's very important, because when the learners are interested in that format, the appearance of the content, then they may have put more attention and then effort to learn from that content. The second one, the learners should have the skill to do the activities. Activities that we design should really, we should really consider the ability of the learners. Usually the activities are interesting, but then the learners are not able to do that. So they will not be able to accomplish the activity. Next, the activities should take account of whether the learners share the same first language. Yes, it's important to consider about the students' native language. If they share the same language, then it will be different, because when we give the direction, maybe we want to use English or their first language or their native language. Then the activities should be suitable for a range of levels of proficiency in a class. We always assume that the ability of the learners are different from one student to another. So that's why we have to provide activities, and we always base the activity on the probable level of the learners. Some are quite low and some are quite high, and then we have to deal with both level of ability within the learners. And then the activities should suit the size of the class. We have discussed this about how to deal with a large class. When the students consist of 40 students, then the activity may be different from the class, which contain only about 20 students. So that consideration will give us appropriate strategy for delivery. The activities should fit the learning style of the learners. Most of the time, we vary the activities because we consider that some of the learners may learn better when we present it orally. So it will benefit the auditory learners. And in some cases, we design activities for the visual learners. We present a lot of pictures, images, and the learners can learn better because it is suitable to their learning style. Some activities may consider about asking the student to move around because we believe that some students are kinesthetic or bodily kinesthetic. They like to move around, to use their body to learn. While they're learning, they do the activities. So this variety of activities are always based on the learning style of the learners in order that we can have effective learning within the learners. Other important consideration is based on teachers and situation. The teacher will consider about their, for example, their capability. Okay. So the activities should be able to be presented and managed by the teacher. Should be able to organize the group activity, pair activity, whole class activity. So we design these kind of activities based on the assumption that the teacher can manage the kind of activity. So when you design a group activity, you have to believe that the teacher are able to manage these group activities. And the last one is about situation. For example, the course book should be easy to carry. The material in the course should not be too expensive, for example, and the amount of material in the lesson should suit the length of the class. Once again, we have talked about this in the environment analysis. If we have only 90 minutes in one meeting, then the amount of material should suit that 90 minutes activity. And then the activity should suit the physical feature of the classroom. So it is impossible to make group work when all the chairs and the desks of the learners have been permanently put in a very specific row in row arrangement, for example. They cannot move around the chairs and the desks, and then it's quite impossible to do a group activity. That's because of the features of the classroom, the situation of the classroom and the facilities that will not enable you to form small group activities in the classroom. Another consideration for the decision is about the need analysis that we discussed. In terms of the learners, we have three factors. That's the lacks, necessities, and wants. We have to consider this aspect, the lacks of the learners, and then how we are going to decide about the format of the content, which will suit the students' lack, what they have unknown in terms of the material and the skills. And then we have to put it into consideration about that, and then we design the activity. And also about the students' wants. They may prefer an activity in some format, and then you have to consider that. If they say that doing games is interesting for them, and then you have to design some kind of games. If they do like solving problem, you may want to present some kind of puzzles, word puzzle or crossword puzzle. So that will suit their wants or necessities. the kind of activity should be useful to the learners in their future use or future learning of the language. So if they are expected to work somewhere, and then if they plan to enter a university, for example, if it is they are junior or secondary school students, and then we have to consider the format for their learning of the language. It's also important to consider about the necessity. We may want to discuss with the learners what type of skills that they really prioritize, and then we consider that, and then we design the activity that will meet their priority. Okay, now let's review briefly about the principle that we have discussed in the previous meetings. In formal and presentation, you already understand that there are 10 principles, starting from motivation for strength, comprehensible input, fluency, output, deliberate learning, time on test, depth of processing, integrative motivation, and learning style. So these are the principles that you have to once again review in order that you can design the technique or delivery of the content. So starting from the motivation. So motivation should be put into the priority, because the more the students are motivated, then the more learning may occur within them. So the more they are motivated, the more probable that they will develop their skill better. So you have to consider that the material that you format in the presentation and also the delivery technique should really engage them, should really motivate them, trigger their motivation to put more effort in their learning in order that they can have a good learning outcome. And then we will discuss more about the 4 strengths, about the meaning-focused input, the language-focused learning, meaning-focused output, and fluency activities. These are really principles that probably most frequently considered by all the material developers, publishers. And then the next one is comprehensible input. So once again, it is a good idea that all the language that you present should be started from the comprehensible input. They already have some knowledge and skill about that, and then try to put forward a new one so they can process the new one using their knowledge, their previous knowledge. And then fluency. So fluency is another principle which is very important. In terms of speaking, in terms of reading, they have to have a good ability to read. If they already comprehend the text, for example, we have to do exercises to make them enabled to read faster. So speed, if they can read in a faster way with a good and better understanding, that will be the best way to improve their fluency. So not only their comprehension, but also their speed. And then the output, the language output should be considered in order that there is always some kind of practices and activity or text that will enable them and demand them to produce the language. So that must be the speaking and writing as the productive skill of the language. And then the next one, deliberate learning, is an important principle. For example, do not always believe that vocabulary can be learned incidentally. When they find it in the reading text, then they read it once, they find the meaning in the dictionary, and then they will remember the meaning. They can use the word in their own language production. It is impossible to happen. So you have to design some activities by which they can memorize and master the word. So they find the word in the reading text, and then you design a variety of activities, 3 or 4 types of activities by which they will master the words. They can use, they understand the meaning, and then they will able to pronounce, to spell the words correctly. That's what I mean by deliberate learning, in contrast to incidental learning. And then time on test. We have also discussed this. The more times they see the vocabulary, for example, and then the more probable that they will memorize the words, for example. So different type of exercises will deal with the same vocabulary, for example. Now, that means that they can see the words in different time, so more time is spent to deal with the words. That's what we mean by time on tasks. And then depth of processing, we have discussed in last time. If you drill them to pronounce the word correctly, and then they imitate you, they follow you, they will be able to pronounce the word fluently. But then it is what we call the swallow processing. It's not in-depth processing. If you want them to do some text, for example, by creating their own mnemonic, the way that they can memorize the vocabulary words, then that will be what we call the depth processing. And then integrative motivation. In motivation which come from within the learners. So it is always better to have integrative motivation than instrumental motivation. Integrative motivation may endure or last longer than the instrumental motivation. So we have to always try to build up the integrative motivation within the learners. And then the last one is learning style. The learning preference, the way by which the student may learn better and faster should be considered. So once again, I can repeat that students who learn better and faster using visual, they are called visual learners. They can learn better when the material is presented through pictures or images. But some other learners may learn better when they listen. So when there is a small group discussion, this kind of learners, we call it auditory learners, may learn much better instead of presenting the material using the picture. So this learning style principle is very important in order that we can vary the material format and also the strategy of delivery. Well, now let's discuss in more detail about one of the principles among the 10 principles. That's the 4 strengths. They are meaning focus input and meaning focus output, kemudian language focused learning, and fluency development. There are 4 aspects in this principle. So take a look at this condition for developing the format and presentation, or the format of the contents, and then the strategy of delivery. Meaning focus input, meaning that focus on the message. So when the learners are presented with reading text, the most important one is they can analyze the meaning within the context of the passage. And then different activities may be something like this: listening to story, extensive reading, listening while reading, and then communicative activities. So once again, considering the condition here, the focus is on message, and only a small amount of unfamiliar language features. So when you select a reading passage, for example, for reading or for listening, figure out that there are only a small number of new words, the words that you assume the learners are not have known yet. So do not select a reading passage, for example, which contain a lot of new unfamiliar words. for the learners. That will make them frustrating. And then a large quantity of input. So the more language input are presented, the more probable that they will have some kind of model and patterns within their memory. And then by that pattern, they may develop their own hypothesis about the language. And by this hypothesis, they may produce the language based on the hypothesis that they have built. And once again, without a large quantity of input, then it's quite impossible for them to build up their own hypothesis about the language. And then meaning focus output. So output meaning the productive skill, speaking and writing. Once again, the focus is on message. So let them speak, do not interrupt to correct their speech, for example. The important one is the message can be get across. And then only a small amount of the language features and large quantity of output. So the more they practice on speaking, the more they practice on writing, the better will be in this meaning focus output. And activities may involve something like short talks, communicative activities, writing story and assignments, letter writing, and these are only some activities that might be considered to develop the meaning focus output. There are still some other activities that you may find out there in the literature. The other two aspects of the fourth strength is language focused learning. So this is what I mentioned just now, deliberate focus on language features. So when you are talking about grammar, for example, do not believe that when they found the type of grammar in the reading text, then they will learn the kind of grammar. You should develop some kind of activities, exercises, and practice or tasks in order that they can deliberately learn that type of grammatical features. This is not only in grammar, but a lot of activities, other activities like pronunciation practice, spelling practice, learning vocabulary from vocabs and intensive reading, grammar study, substitution table and drill, dictation, feedback and correction. So these activities may help them to learn more about the language features. We have to focus on the language features by deliberate learning. And the next one, the last one, is about fluency development. Different type of activities like listening to stories, link skill activities, easy extensive reading, repeated reading, speed reading, and 10-minute writing. 10-minute writing is an activity that can always be done in every class. The students are given or allowed about 10 minutes, and then they can write on a topic freely. So usually, as a free writing, we do not consider about the unity of the paragraph, but what we want to see is how many ideas that they can generate, and they can write in a full sentence about the topic in 10 minutes. The condition to develop the fluency is once again focus on message. No unfamiliar language features. Do not expect them to write a new grammatical feature in their writing if it is not unfamiliar to them. Pressure to go faster. So in 10-minute writing, for example, they are demanded, they are forced to write as many as possible sentences or words in 10 minutes in a topic. So it's kind of pressure to them, but that will train them to use the limited time to produce as much as possible ideas within the writing or in speaking. A large quantity of practice. So once again, to be able to speak fluency, practice is important. So the more they practice, the more likely that they will more fluent in speaking. The same as writing. They will be able to write better when they practice more. So practice is very important in terms of fluency development, including reading. So reading may be varied activities, including the reading aloud, sustainable silent reading, reading partner, reading speed, and different kind of activities they will develop their reading fluency then. Next, we'll talk about the lesson format. There are 6 important information about the format of the lesson. First one, there should be learning from comprehensible input as a basis for the later activities. So once again, the distance between the knowledge of the students should not be far enough to the new information or the new language item to be learned, in order that they can use their knowledge to process the new information, in order they can build up new knowledge based on the prior knowledge that they already have. So comprehensible input is an important term. I repeat once again, and you can check the concept by Krashen, comprehensible input hypothesis and I+1 hypothesis. Next, language-focused learning will contribute to the production of output. So the more vocabulary that they master, the more probable that they can produce more language in their speech or in their writing, including grammatical items. So the more grammatical items they master, the more probable that they will write a variety of sentences in their writing. So it's important to develop the language-focused learning, language features that they have to master in order that they can produce more fluently and in more quantity of language in their language production. Learners should have to produce language with a focus on the message. So in some cases, we do not pay attention to the accuracy, the grammaticality of the sentences, but we focus on the message, whether the message is already conveyed, the listener and the reader can understand the message. And then later on, we can, of course, provide feedback for the correction of the grammatical construction of the sentences, for example. But during the practice and exercises, we may delay the interruption of correction. Just pay attention to the message, and when the message should be okay, then let them go through the exercises. The next information about this is about repetition. Repetition is an important aid to learning, and material should be recycled in a lesson. Yeah, this can also be seen in the principle like space retrieve. Space retrieval. You deal with one language item, and then in the later exercise, you try to put again that language item into the exercise. So this kind of item is what we call a recycle. They can see it several times within the one class or probably in the following classes. We also say this as a time on tasks. So it's a similar principle. Learners' interest can be engaged through short activities, attractive presentation using pictures, and a degree of unpredictability regarding the types of exercises. So once again, interest should be captured by the presentation of the material, the format of the material, probably using pictures and images, and then the material will be more interesting to them. That will make them more engaged in their activities. And also, it is important to consider about the activities, how long each activity will be. Usually between 7 to 15 minutes at most for one activity, and probably 5 to 10 minutes is a good amount of time for each activity. You vary and you change the activity within 10 minutes, then that means that you try to redirect their attention to the exercises. If the activity takes too much, 20 minutes or 25 minutes, they may lose their attention during the process of doing the exercises. Learners need not know why they are doing a particular activity. In some cases, they do the exercises and then they finally can achieve the skill that we formulate. We want them to achieve without knowing why they do that activity. So the important thing is you have some kind of intention, specific goal in your mind that the student will achieve by designing that kind of activities. The student do not need to know that, but you really have some kind of specific goal in your mind why you design that kind of activities. And of course, by that activity, the goal that you have in mind can be achieved by the students. Now let's see how we develop the strategy for delivery of the content. For example, your goal is about the vocabulary development of the learners, then you may have different kind of activities. One of them for vocabulary is like, is my word. And then the variation is speaker and words. And the preparation of the teacher is about model procedure. The group size, it doesn't matter whether it's a large class or small class, because you can group them all together when you are doing this kind of activity. If this kind of activity can be found in some literature, some books on teaching vocabulary, for example, by nations. You have this kind of activity. So you can find out the type of activity that may be effective for the development of a specific skill within your learners. When you are doing listening and speaking activity, speaking and listening ability development, and then these are activities that might be adjust or imitate or probably adopted. Morning talk. Usually when you watch television program, you have program like morning talks, and then you may want to design such a kind of activity in your classroom. Speaker and topic, for example, in one of the morning talk program on TV, every morning talk will have specific topic which is the issue, become issue within the society. And then the teacher doesn't have any preparation, and then the learners may be a group as a large group as a class, a whole class. You can also have to develop the listening and speaking skill by interview activities. So the variation would be the students who are partner, they can change partners to have the interview. And then the preparation is the teachers have some kind of model interview, and the activity should be in pairs. Even though we have what we call the small group interview, so one interviewer may have 3 or 4 interviewees, but in the development of the listening and speaking ability, probably have only pair 1-on-1 students to be in this activity. Other activity like weather report on text, dictation, and talk and report. These are activities may be effective enough in developing the listening and speaking skill of the learners. There are different types of dictation. You may have partner, but you may also have a small group. If you have what we call the running dictation. So small group of students, maybe 4 or 5 students will be in a group, and then they will read some text outside of the classroom and then come into the group again and whistle to the group member, and then the other group member will write the sentence that they just hear from the other member of the group. And this is some interesting activity actually to develop the listening and speaking. So you read a sentence, you say the sentence to your partner or to your group member, and then the group member will say or write the sentence that you tell them. Okay, different kind of activities, and they are all interesting activities, of course, to develop the ability. For other skill like reading and writing, there are different type of activities that you can find out in the literature, in textbook. Reading, for example, we have SSR, sustained silent reading. So the learners reading the text silently, and then after that they will talk to one another about what they have read. And this is called the sustained silent reading. The student may be assigned to read books, for example, or stories or folk tales, or different kind of text, of course. And then after that, they will talk to one another about what they have read. Speed reading. You can increase your speed by training speed reading. For example, you read a text, a passage of 100 words. The first time you read, you may spend 3 minutes or maybe 2 minutes. And then you train yourself to read the 100 passage in less than 1 minute, and you still understand the content of the text. So you can develop your reading speed by doing a lot of exercises and practice for speed reading. Information transfer, it's another activity for reading. And of course, the activity will be done individually. But after doing each of this activity, they may have discussion within a small group or the whole class group. Writing. One of the activities that teacher usually do is what we call continuous reading. So the teacher provide a topic or select a topic, and one student will write a sentence. The main idea may be written by the teacher, and then the first student will write the next one sentence. And after that, the other student next to him will read the sentences and then try to continue the story by writing another sentence. And all the students in the class will continue writing one sentence for each, for example. And then finally, they will have a story on the topic provided by the teacher. Post office, new letter, procedure for distributing letter, and the activity may be individual, may also be in small group. I have what we call the post office classroom. So every student will have a kind of mailbox in front of their desk, and then every student may write a kind of message to classmates and put it in the mailbox, and the student receiving the message may reply by putting the reply into the mailbox of the learners, the other learners. So this quite meaningful activity when used the what we call the post office classroom. Next, let's consider about the techniques and activities to develop the micro skill of the language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. First of all, activity may be based on experience or shared activities. To develop the listening skill based on experience, then this kind of activity may be done. Listening to a graded reader, read aloud, learn skills. If you have what we call the graded reader, and then you may want to use the book to be read to the learners. Or maybe the learners will do it in their own small group. So one will read, and then the other will listen, and then they will have another activity after that to analyze and to discuss about the content of the book. So this is about listening. And speaking, yeah. Speaking. 431 or 432. This is a kind of activity that in a group of 4, and then finally the information will be shared to 3, and then the 3 will share to 2. So they will speak from one group to another group. So more practice on speaking will be done on this format for this room. And then asking and answering, that's another activity. Talking about very familiar topic. If the students are all familiar with sports, and then they can choose that to ask them to talk one another based on the topic that you provide, that you consider most of the students are familiar with the topic. Best recording. So it is a good idea that using the technology, they may want to record their own speech, maybe starting from what we call the reading, and then they record. And next they will be given points, and then they will speak about the point. And finally there is nothing. And then they will be only given topic, and then they will speak, and then they record. So it can be used in a graded difficulty from the fully guided. That means that they only read and then they record. But then what we call this semi-guided, they will be provided only points, and then they will talk about points, and then they record. And finally, they will only give one topic, and then they'll talk about the topic. So these are the speaking activity that might be interesting, and they can develop their speaking ability. So other activities are also important, and detail of these activities may be found in a variety of textbook, and you can also find many of these activities through the internet. If you want the detail of each of the activity, then you can type in the name of the activity, and then there will be some information from the internet. How about reading and writing? Reading a graded reader, one of the what is the weaknesses of our education system is the lack of availability of reading books, that are suitable for different level of proficiency in English. We call it a graded reader. If they are beginner reader, then they have to read all kind of book. If they are in the level of intermediate, there should also be books that are suitable for their level. If they are advanced students, then they can read books which are suitable to their level as advanced students. So we still lack of this kind of facility and resources. Easy extensive reading. So what we mean by extensive reading is reading material which is taken from different kind of disciplines or walks of life. So for example, reading on mathematics, reading on medical sciences, reading on tourism, and different kind of walks of life. We call it extensive reading. So they will be familiar with different kind of vocabulary in different science discipline. ISOSLOCs, link skills, repeated reading, speed reading course. So that there are different type of activities that may be used to develop the reading skill and reading ability of the learners. And the last one is about writing. Reading, discussing, and then writing. So usually reading is the basis for writing. So after reading, then they may have to write some kind of notes, what they have read. For example, the most interesting event in the story, or the events that they do not like, for example. And then they can write the kind of response to the text that they have read. Draw and write. Yeah, this is also an important activity and very interesting. So when you are drawing something, you can talk a lot about what you have drawn, of course, because it is your drawing. It's different from a drawing made by some other people, and then you try to explain about the drawing. It is quite difficult. But if you draw yourself, you can talk a lot about it because you are the one who who draw that picture, for example. Project work, this is also an important thing. You may talk about your campus, for example, in terms of the facilities, activities that you have in campus, so that may become a project. And then another 10-minute writing, we have discussed this. The next one is not only experience, but also shared. So you may share the type of activities that you consider effective with the classmates or the teacher colleagues, for example. Ranking and strip story. Yeah, strip story is a kind of sketches that may tell us about a series of activities, and then we can listen to story read to us while we are looking at the strip stories, for example. And then finally we can retell the story because while we are listening, we see the picture, for example. So one will read the story and the other will share by looking at a picture, for example. Speaking, brainstorming, this is one of the ways to generate ideas. When you are given a topic, then you may discuss it in small group and brainstorm about the ideas related to the topic that you are being assigned to write. You will have more ideas, of course, when you do it together in a small group. Find the differences, that is comparing and contrast about issues. This can also be about illustration that may have some differences, quite similar, but they have some difference, and you can describe the difference between the two pictures, for example. Self-information. This is the like a biography that you have to present in the oral form. About reading, pause, prompt, and praise. Another technique for reading. You pause and then you try to predict what will happen next. After reading a paragraph, then you may pause and then you try to remember the text that you have read in the paragraph, and then you predict what will happen next in the next paragraph. So pause, prompt, and praise. This is another activity which is also interesting in reading. And then paired reading. You may have two students that read one book, and then they can share later about what they have read. They may have read based on the vision of the book. For example, if you have the Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, and then they will share who will read Unit 1 and who will read Unit 2, and then finally they will share that. And then writing. While we have the group composition, just now we call it continued writing. Group composition, so they may work together in group and produce a piece of writing. Then peer feedback. After writing an essay or composition, then it may be shared to a classmate, and then the classmate will try to check the writing, and then the classmate will provide some kind of feedback about our writing, including the convention, the punctuation, the capitalization, the spelling, and also the grammatical form, and also the what they call the deep structure of the writing, the meaning. So our classmate may also provide feedback about the ideas within the writing, not only the surface structure. Next, guided. So just now we say experience, share, and now guided. Guided listening. So there might be a lot of activities for this, like dictation. So when you do a dictation, for example, to develop the listening ability, you may have some kind of guided. So you may have provided the first letter of the words or one word within the sentence, for example, and then they continue writing after reading the after the teacher read the sentence. So this is guided. Guided even consists of three levels. Ada fully guided. So everything is in writing, for example, they only copy the writing. So fully guided. In speaking, there is a model, for example, and they just copy the model. And it's called the fully guided. And we have the semi-guided. So we only provide some part of the listening or the speaking or the writing, and then the student will complete the missing part of the reading or of the dictation, for example. So these activities are can be developed to be included as a technique of delivery of the content within our course or the course book. Once again, you may read carefully about activities that will develop the listening skill, speaking skill, reading skill, and writing skill. And this type of activities can be found the detail in different textbooks. Teaching reading, for example, you may read the book and then you find different type of exercises that will develop the writing skill of the learners. Or you can just, once again, find this information, the detail of these activities in the internet. And then the last one is independent. So that means that there is not any guide any longer from the learners. So the student will go by themselves, work on their own. For example, to develop their listening skill, reading on unsimplified text. So the listening, probably they can listen to podcasts on different type of news, for example, and that's really an independent activity. Taking part in a friendly conversation, not taking. So skill in listening to a presentation, for example, or a lecture, or presentation in a conference or seminar, and then you try to take note, that will develop your listening skill, of course. Speaking, giving a task, if you give a topic and then the student will find out information from different type of resources through the internet, talking to friends, and then they will have the information and then they can organize the material and then they can deliver the speech, for example. Telling a joke, taking part in any kind of discussion, for example. So this is some activity that will develop their independent speaking ability. Reading, independent reading, is reading subtitled to a film, for example. They are watching movies and then subtitle of the movies can be seen and then they read it. They can read it silently or they can read it loudly. That will practice their reading speed and reading ability. Reading the newspaper, reading a novel, these are more advanced learners when we are talking about reading newspaper and reading a novel. And then in writing, independent development of writing, some activities might look like writing a letter, or writing an assignment. Most of the exercises in writing class will be some kind of writing an assignment. The assignment might be guided or might be independent. You are only given a topic and then you will assign to write a different type of text probably argumentative text or descriptive text or any other type of text. So this is the end of the discussion on format and presentation. And you may want to review the chapter once again before you do the assignment that will be posted on the Google Classroom. So once again, you may check your Google Classroom and then take a look at the assignment there. But before you do the assignment, you may want to once again review the related chapters from the books, whether from Nation and McAllister and the other book by Richards. So it is important to review the chapters because the assignment are related to those chapters. Okay, I thank you all for your attention, and then I'm looking forward to your accomplished assignment. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.